written in the same reconstructed narrative style inspired by the types of civil disputes commonly featured on the series rather than a verified transcript. Begins with a lawsuit between the owner of a vintage automobile and a classic car restoration shop over an allegedly incomplete restoration project, unauthorized replacement parts, and thousands of dollars in disputed labor charges. The plaintiff, a retired firefighter and longtime automobile enthusiast, explains that he purchased a 1968 muscle car several years earlier with the dream of restoring it to its original factory condition. After saving for years, he hired the defendant's restoration shop because it advertised specialized experience with classic American vehicles and promised museum-quality workmanship. According to the plaintiff, the parties agreed that every effort would be made to preserve original factory components while replacing only those parts that could not reasonably be repaired. The plaintiff testifies that he delivered the vehicle to the defendant together with detailed photographs documenting its original condition, factory identification numbers, and rare components that significantly contributed to the car's collector value. The restoration estimate projected completion within 9 months, including body repair, engine rebuilding, suspension restoration, interior refurbishment, and complete repainting using the original factory color. Believing the defendant possessed the necessary expertise, the plaintiff paid a substantial deposit and agreed to additional progress payments as various stages of the restoration were completed. During the first several months, communication between the parties appeared positive. The defendant regularly sent photographs showing the vehicle disassembled, the body stripped to bare metal, and mechanical components undergoing restoration. The plaintiff visited the workshop several times and expressed satisfaction with the visible progress. However, after approximately 6 months, updates became increasingly infrequent. Telephone calls often went unanswered, promised completion dates were repeatedly postponed, and invoices requesting additional payments became more frequent without corresponding evidence of completed work. Nearly 14 months after the project began, the plaintiff finally visited the restoration shop unannounced. According to his testimony, he was shocked to discover that many original components, including the factory carburetor, steering wheel, radio, and several engine accessories, had been replaced with reproduction parts without his knowledge or approval. He also claims that the vehicle remained partially disassembled despite repeated assurances that completion was only weeks away. Concerned that the restoration no longer reflected the original agreement, the plaintiff removed the car from the shop and hired another restoration specialist to evaluate the work already performed. The second restoration expert allegedly concluded that while portions of the bodywork were professionally completed, several replacement components significantly reduced the vehicle's authenticity and collector value. The plaintiff now seeks reimbursement for unauthorized parts replacement, corrective restoration costs, and a portion of the labor charges already paid. The defendant disputes the allegations and insists that every decision was made in the plaintiff's best interest. According to his testimony, many original components were severely worn, damaged by corrosion, or impossible to restore economically. He explains that reproduction parts from reputable manufacturers often provide greater reliability while maintaining nearly identical appearance. The defendant also argues that the plaintiff approved additional work during several telephone conversations, even though those approvals were never documented in writing. Judge Judy immediately requests the written restoration agreement together with any invoices, change orders, and correspondence exchanged during the project. The plaintiff produces a signed contract stating that original factory components would be preserved whenever reasonably possible, and that major deviations required customer approval. Judge Judy carefully reviews the language before asking whether written authorization was obtained before replacing significant original parts. The defendant admits that no written approvals exist. The plaintiff introduces photographs taken before the restoration began alongside photographs taken after he removed the vehicle from the shop. Judge Judy studies the images carefully, noting that several factory components visible in the original photographs no longer appear in the partially restored vehicle. She asks the defendant whether those original parts were retained. The defendant explains that some damaged components were discarded because they were considered beyond repair. Judge Judy immediately questions why potentially valuable collector items were disposed of without consulting the owner. Attention then shifts toward the disputed labor charges. The plaintiff presents invoices showing substantial additional billing beyond the original estimate. Many entries describe custom fabrication, additional restoration labor, and specialized repairs without detailed explanations. Judge Judy asks the defendant why more specific records were not maintained. The defendant responds that restoration work frequently uncovers hidden problems requiring immediate attention, making detailed documentation difficult during daily operations. An independent classic car appraiser appears as an expert witness. After examining the vehicle, he concludes that the quality of the bodywork is generally excellent. However, he also explains that collector vehicles derive substantial value from original matching components. Replacing authentic factory parts with reproduction pieces, even high-quality reproductions, can significantly reduce market value when performed without the owner's consent. Judge Judy asks whether the removed parts should have been preserved regardless of condition. The expert replies that experienced restoration shops almost always retain original components until customers decide how they wish to proceed. The defendant argues that his primary responsibility was creating a reliable, drivable automobile rather than maximizing collector value. The plaintiff responds that he repeatedly emphasized his desire for originality rather than convenience. Judge Judy notes that the written contract strongly supports the plaintiff's position because preserving authenticity formed a central purpose of the restoration agreement. Discussion broadens into the unique nature of classic automobile restoration. Judge Judy explains that restoring collectible vehicles differs fundamentally from ordinary mechanical repair. Owners often value originality as highly as functionality, making communication and written approval essential whenever irreplaceable components may be altered or discarded. Closing arguments summarize the dispute. The plaintiff argues that he entrusted the defendant with a valuable collector vehicle only to discover unauthorized decisions that permanently affected its originality. The defendant maintains that every replacement was performed professionally and improved the vehicle's reliability, even if certain original parts were no longer available. Judge Judy carefully reviews the restoration contract, invoices, photographs, expert testimony, correspondence, and payment records before delivering her decision. She concludes that while the defendant performed substantial skilled restoration work, he violated the agreement by replacing and discarding important original components without obtaining the owner's informed approval. The evidence clearly demonstrates that preserving authenticity represented a major contractual objective. Judge Judy awards the plaintiff compensation covering the documented reduction in value attributable to the unauthorized replacement of original components together with reimbursement for reasonable corrective restoration costs necessary to return the vehicle as closely as possible to its agreed specifications. However, she declines to order repayment for all labor charges because much of the restoration work, including body repair and mechanical rebuilding, was competently completed and provided genuine value. Before dismissing the parties, Judge Judy offers practical advice to restoration professionals and collectors alike. Every significant modification should be approved in writing before work proceeds, and no original component should ever be discarded without the owner's explicit permission. Detailed photographs, inventory lists, and regular progress reports help protect both parties when projects extend over many months. The litigants leave the courtroom with mixed reactions. The classic car owner recovers a significant portion of his financial losses while facing the challenge of locating replacement factory original parts, and the restoration shop is reminded that technical expertise must always be matched by clear communication and respect for a customer's wishes. Judge Judy concludes the case with another familiar lesson. Craftsmanship may restore a vehicle's appearance, but trust is restored only by honoring the promises made before the first wrench is ever turned. Continues with a second case involving a dispute between a landlord and a former tenant over unpaid rent, damage to a furnished condominium, and responsibility for several expensive appliances that allegedly stopped working shortly before the tenant moved out. The plaintiff, who owns several rental properties, explains that she leased a fully furnished condominium to the defendant under a one-year agreement that included all major appliances, living room furniture, and kitchen equipment. According to her testimony, the tenant paid the required security deposit, moved into the property without incident, and lived there for approximately 11 months before announcing plans to relocate for a new job. The plaintiff states that during most of the lease the relationship remained cordial. Rent was generally paid on time, and the defendant rarely submitted maintenance requests. Problems arose only during the final month of occupancy. According to the plaintiff, the tenant informed her that the dishwasher no longer functioned, the refrigerator made unusual noises, and the washing machine leaked water onto the laundry room floor. The plaintiff scheduled a maintenance inspection, but before technicians arrived, the defendant had already moved out and returned the keys. During the final inspection, the plaintiff discovered damaged hardwood flooring beneath the leaking washing machine, broken shelving inside the refrigerator, stained upholstery on the living room sofa, and several missing pieces of kitchen equipment listed on the original inventory. She argues that these conditions exceeded ordinary wear and tear, and now seeks compensation for appliance replacement, furniture cleaning, flooring repairs, and unpaid rent for the final 2 weeks of the lease. The defendant disputes many of the allegations. He explains that the appliances were already several years old when he moved into the condominium and believes they simply reached the end of their useful life through normal use. According to his testimony, he reported the washing machine leak shortly after noticing it, but never received a timely response from the plaintiff. He argues that any resulting floor damage occurred because the landlord delayed arranging repairs despite receiving notice of the problem. The defendant also denies damaging the refrigerator shelves, explaining that one shelf cracked while holding ordinary groceries, suggesting a manufacturing defect rather than misuse. Judge Judy immediately requests the lease agreement together with the move-in inspection report and inventory checklist. The plaintiff produces signed documents listing every appliance, furniture item, and kitchen accessory included with the rental. Judge Judy reviews the paperwork carefully before asking whether the defendant noted any existing defects when he first moved in. The defendant points out several handwritten comments describing minor scratches on the flooring and light wear on the sofa, but confirms that the appliances appeared functional at that time. Attention then shifts toward maintenance communication. The defendant presents email correspondence showing that he informed the plaintiff about the leaking washing machine nearly 3 weeks before moving out. Judge Judy studies the emails and asks the plaintiff why repairs were not arranged sooner. The plaintiff explains that her regular appliance technician was unavailable and that she expected the leak to be relatively minor based on the defendant's description. Judge Judy responds that water leaks should never be treated casually because they often cause greater damage the longer they remain unresolved. The plaintiff introduces photographs taken after the defendant vacated the property. The images show warped hardwood flooring beneath the washing machine, stained cushions on the sofa, cracked refrigerator shelving, and several empty spaces where kitchen utensils had previously been stored. Judge Judy asks whether the missing inventory items were specifically identified during the final walkthrough. The plaintiff produces the signed inventory checklist indicating that several serving dishes, cookware pieces, and small appliances could not be located. The defendant acknowledges that one blender and several inexpensive kitchen utensils may have been misplaced during the move, but denies taking anything intentionally. He also argues that the sofa stains resulted from normal everyday use and could likely be removed through professional cleaning rather than full replacement. An appliance repair technician appears as an expert witness. After examining the washing machine, he testifies that the leak originated from a worn internal hose that gradually deteriorated over time rather than sudden physical damage. Judge Judy asks whether routine inspection would likely have detected the problem earlier. The technician replies that replacing aging hoses forms part of normal preventative maintenance for landlords supplying appliances with rental properties. Discussion then turns to the damaged flooring. The technician explains that although the leaking hose caused the water damage, prompt repairs after the initial report could have significantly reduced the extent of the deterioration. Judge Judy notes that landlords have a responsibility to respond reasonably to maintenance requests once they receive notice of potentially damaging conditions. The plaintiff argues that regardless of maintenance delays, the defendant should have stopped using the washing machine after noticing the leak. The defendant responds that he believed the landlord intended to repair the appliance quickly and attempted to minimize use until then. Closing arguments summarize the dispute. The plaintiff insists the tenant failed to care for furnished property and should reimburse the resulting repair costs. The defendant maintains that aging appliances, delayed maintenance, and ordinary wear not negligence caused most of the claimed damage. Judge Judy carefully reviews the lease agreement, inventory checklist, maintenance emails, photographs, expert testimony, repair estimates, and payment records before delivering her decision. She concludes that responsibility must be divided. The defendant is liable for replacing the missing kitchen items and paying for professional cleaning of the stained sofa because those losses are supported by clear evidence. However, the plaintiff bears primary responsibility for the water damage to the hardwood floor because she failed to address the reported washing machine leak within a reasonable period after receiving notice. Judge Judy also finds that the cracked refrigerator shelf most likely resulted from ordinary use rather than misuse, and therefore should be treated as routine maintenance rather than tenant damage. Judge Judy orders the defendant to reimburse the plaintiff for the documented value of the missing inventory and furniture cleaning while denying recovery for flooring replacement and appliance repairs. She also rules that the landlord may not retain entire security deposit because many of the claimed deductions relate to maintenance responsibilities that properly belong to the property owner. Before dismissing the parties, Judge Judy offers practical advice to landlords and tenants alike. Landlords should respond immediately to reports involving water leaks or potentially hazardous maintenance issues, while tenants should document every repair request in writing and avoid continued use of malfunctioning appliances whenever possible. Careful communication and prompt action, she explains, often prevent minor maintenance problems from becoming expensive legal disputes. The litigants leave the courtroom with a clearer understanding of their respective responsibilities. The landlord recovers compensation for property clearly attributable to the tenant, while the tenant avoids paying for damage caused largely by delayed maintenance. Judge Judy concludes the case with another practical observation. Owning rental property means accepting the responsibility to maintain it, and renting someone else's home means returning it with the same care in which it was received.